She was hanging beneath a failing bridge over a roaring gorge, blood running down her palm, shouting orders at men twice her size, and the most powerful rancher in Granite Ridge told the crowd he felt sorry for any man fool enough to marry her. She heard every word. She didn't flinch. She finished saving those families, walked to him, pressed the broken cable into his hands, and said she'd never asked a man to live with her and didn't intend to start. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who later had to depend on you, stay until the very end of this story. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss what comes next, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1887 came to Granite Ridge like a punishment. The grass along the lower cattle trails had gone yellow by the second week of July, and the mountain streams that fed the basin were running thin and brown between their rocks. Dust hung over every road. The air smelled of dry pine and baked earth, and the cattle moved slower than usual, heavy with heat, their breath coming in short, exhausted bursts. It was the kind of summer that made men short-tempered and communities brittle, the kind that revealed who a person really was when comfort ran out. Nora Whitcomb had been awake since before sunrise. She always was. The Whitcomb way station sat on the eastern ridge above Raven Gorge, close enough to the suspension bridge that she could hear the timber groan when the wind moved through the canyon. Her mother had built the herb garden. Her father had built the bridge. Nora had inherited both, along with the responsibility of keeping them alive, and she had never once treated that inheritance as a burden. She treated it as a calling. That morning, she had already checked the West Anchor cable, cataloged 3 new bundles of dried yarrow, recorded the overnight river level in her ledger, and prepared a small breakfast for 2 passing ranch hands who had stopped with a lame horse just after dawn. One of them had tried to leave without paying. She had handed his hat back to him and told him the meal cost 20 cents or 2 hours of honest labor, and he could decide which. He paid. She was crossing the bridge on her 3rd inspection of the morning when she heard the wagon. It was moving too fast. Nora knew that sound the way a river pilot knows the sound of shallow water. The particular slap of wooden wheels against plank, the irregular rhythm of a team that had been pushed harder than was wise. She leaned over the east rail and looked toward the far bank. 6 families. 1 large freight wagon and 2 smaller supply rigs, all loaded heavier than they should have been. The lead driver was trying to make up lost time, and he had misjudged the entrance angle. The front wheels caught the side rail. The wagon lurched. The entire rig shuddered sideways, and before anyone on the bank could shout a warning, the right rear wheel broke through the outer plank and hung suspended over 140 feet of open air above the Raven River. The screaming started. Children. Women. The high, terrible sound of draft animals trying to find purchase on a surface that would not hold. Nora was already moving. She did not stop to think. She did not go back to the way station for help or look toward the road for a man to take charge. She grabbed the heavy rope coil from the bridge maintenance hook, looped it twice around her waist, knotted it to the center cable anchor, with the precision of someone who had done it in darkness and in rain and in fear before this morning, and she went over the side. The timber was hot from the morning sun and rough against her hands. The river sound below her was enormous. She moved along the understructure with her legs hooked over the lower crossbeam, working, hand over hand, toward the damaged section, reading the stress points, the way another woman might read a letter, quickly, completely understanding every word. "The right support brace is sheared," she shouted up to the men frozen on the deck above her. "Nobody moves that wagon until I tell you. Hear me, nobody." 3 men were staring down at her through the gaps in the planks. "Ma'am, you need to come back up and let us." "What you need to do," Nora said without pausing in her movement, "is find me 2 of the longest ropes on that second supply rig and drop them down through the 3rd gap from the east rail. Right now. Not in a moment. Now." The men moved. She heard the horses before she saw the dust. A rider coming hard from the mountain. Then several more behind him, the sound of a cattle crew pushing toward the basin crossing. They pulled up short at the near bank, and she could hear the commotion above her voices, boots on the planks, the shifting weight of new arrivals settling onto the bridge deck. What in a deep voice, not familiar yet, but carrying the particular authority of a man who was not accustomed to arriving second. "Who is that under there?" That's Nora Whitcomb, one of the trapped wagon drivers said. She maintains the bridge. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to carry meaning. Then, is she the only one doing anything about this? Nobody answered him. Nora had reached the damaged brace. The right support had not sheared completely. It had torqued under uneven load, which was better, which meant if she could redistribute the tension before the cable system compensated by pulling in the wrong direction, she might be able to brace it from below long enough to move the wagon back. She needed a second anchor point on the near side. She needed the ropes she'd asked for. And she needed someone on the deck above her who could follow exact instructions without adding his own judgment. "You," she called up. "The man who just arrived. Are you still up there?" "I'm here." "What's your name?" Another pause. Shorter this time. "Silas Mercer." She knew the name. Everyone in the Granite Ridge Basin knew the name. Eagle's Rest Ranch, 700 head, the Mountain Cattle Run. A serious man. Serious men were usually either useful or an obstruction, and the difference showed inside the first 60 seconds. "Mr. Mercer, I need you to take the rope that just came down on your left side and run it from the near bank anchor post to the second ring bolt on the west deck rail. Can you see the ring bolt?" "I see it." "Tie it off with a loaded hitch, not a slip. Then I need your saddle rope, all of it passed down to me through the third gap." A pause. A beat that lasted long enough for her to understand that he was deciding whether he was going to take orders from a woman hanging beneath a failing bridge. "Mr. Mercer," she said, and her voice came out very steady, the kind of steady that was not calm but was controlled. "You can argue with me after those families are alive." She heard him move. The rope came down through the gap 30 seconds later, and it was tied correctly. She used it to reinforce the torqued brace from below, wrapping it twice around the crossbeam and pulling the tension toward the near anchor. It was not a permanent repair. It was a 12-minute repair, which was exactly how long she needed. "Now," she shouted. "Back the wagon, slow. Hands on the traces, not the reins, hands on the traces hold the animals calm, and someone get a shoulder under that right rear axle when the weight shifts. Move it back 6 feet and stop." There was a terrible grinding noise. The whole bridge shuddered. One of the children began crying again, and a woman's voice said something low and fierce that made the child go quiet. Then the wagon moved back, inch by inch. The hanging wheel scraped across the broken plank edge and caught, and for 1 second, the entire structure groaned in a way that made the river below sound closer than it was. And then the wheel found the deck, and the weight distributed, and the screaming tension in the cables eased. Nora held still beneath the bridge until she was certain the brace was holding. Then she unknotted her waist. Rope climbed back up to the deck rail with both hands bleeding from the rough cable work and pulled herself over. She stood on the deck and looked at the families. The children were still pale. The women were clutching one another. The men had the look of people who had just understood how close they'd come to something they couldn't have survived. "Get them across," she told the men nearest the wagons. One rig at a time, slow, no rushing. She was already reaching for the damaged brace cable to examine where it had torqued when she heard the new voice from the near bank. Calvin Rourke. She had never spoken to him directly, but she had seen him twice before, once at the county meeting in May, once outside the freight company office in town. He was a composed man. Well-dressed even on mountain roads, which meant the composure was manufactured, which meant the man beneath it was something other than calm. "This," Calvin said loud enough for the families and the arriving riders, and the men from Silas Mercer's crew, "is precisely what happens when a woman tries to manage public infrastructure alone." What should have been prevented by a competent crossing authority nearly became a tragedy because the bridgekeeper was too proud to accept professional oversight. Nobody argued with him immediately. That was always how it started. One confident voice in the silence, and the silence began to look like agreement. Nora said nothing. She kept her eyes on the cable junction she was examining. "Ma'am," one of Calvin's freight men said from behind her, "Mr. Rourke is speaking." "I heard him," Nora said. "I'm working." She heard Silas Mercer shift his weight somewhere behind her. That particular sound, a big man redistributing his stance, usually meant a man was deciding whether to step forward or step away. She didn't look back to see which he chose. Calvin continued. I've submitted a proposal to the county board for a proper iron crossing, managed by licensed engineers. What nearly happened here this morning is the argument for it. No one person, no woman managing on sentiment and inheritance, should be responsible for the lives of everyone who needs to cross this gorge. One of the ranch families was still on the bridge deck waiting to cross. The mother had a baby on her hip. She was looking at Calvin with an expression that Nora recognized the expression of someone who understood they were being used as a prop in an argument that was not actually about their safety. The families began crossing. Nora counted weights in her head, automatically tracking the load distribution across the remaining supports, watching the tension in the main cables. She would need to replace the torqued brace before anything heavy crossed again. 2 days of work, possibly 3. She would need to order replacement iron from Gideon Pike and pull the support schedule from her father's construction ledger. Her mind was already 3 steps into the repair when Silas Mercer spoke. He had moved closer than she'd realized. He was standing maybe 8 feet away, and he wasn't speaking to her. He was speaking to the men in his crew, the way a man speaks when he wants everyone nearby to hear, but doesn't want to appear to be making a speech. Hard woman, he said. Smart, I'll give her that. But hard. A few of his men made sounds of agreement. No man could live with a woman who treats every breath like a battle. The laughter was low and male and immediate. Nora went still. Not outwardly, her hands kept moving. Her eyes kept tracking the cable line, her breathing didn't change. But something inside her that had been working very fast simply stopped for a moment and held itself quiet. She had heard this before. Not these exact words, but this exact thing. The assessment delivered sideways, meant to be overheard, designed to sting, without giving her a clean target to address. She had heard it from the men who came to her for medicine and left without full payment. She had heard it from the survey committee, who spent 20 minutes explaining that her maintenance records were impressive for a woman. She had heard a version of it from the man who had asked her to marry him 4 years ago. And then when she declined, explained to mutual friends that she was constitutionally incapable of warmth. She set down the cable junction. She unwound the rope from her waist. She picked up the section of snapped bridge cable, 2 feet of braided iron wire. The end of it frayed and strange-looking in a way she had not yet had time to examine closely, and she walked directly to where Silas Mercer stood. She held the cable out to him. He took it automatically, the way a man takes something placed firmly in his hands before he's decided whether he wants it. Then it is fortunate, she said, that I never asked one to. She looked at him long enough for it to mean something. His eyes were gray-blue and weathered at the corners, and currently doing the thing that eyes do when a person is recalculating something they thought they understood. Then she turned and walked off the bridge toward her way station. Her left palm was bleeding. She had known it since she came back over the rail, but had not had time to address it. The cut ran across the base of her fingers, where the rough cable had caught, and it stung in the heat, and she did not look back. Behind her she heard Martha Bell's voice, dry and deliberate as always. A cheap word costs a man nothing, Martha said, which is exactly what it's worth. And then silence from Silas Mercer, which was its own kind of answer. Nora cleaned and wrapped her hand at the waystation table. She used yarrow paste and linen strips, the same combination she used for the travelers who came through with rope burns and saddle sores and the various injuries of hard outdoor work. She was efficient about it. She did not allow herself the luxury of sitting still while it hurt. She had a list. The list existed in her head and in her ledger, and on the worst days, on a folded paper she carried in her apron pocket, though she had not needed the paper in some months. Today's list was longer than usual. Replace torqued brace on east section. Order replacement iron from Gideon. Pull father's construction specs. Count maintenance fund. Calculate minimum repair timeline. Record this morning's incident with date and cause notation. She added one more item in her mind, though she did not write it down. Examine the frayed cable end more closely. Something about it had bothered her during the crossing work. She had been too occupied with the immediate emergency to focus on what she was seeing, but her hands had registered something before her mind caught up. The fraying was wrong. Old cable wire frays in long progressive tears. The individual strands stretch and thin before they break. What she had seen on the cut end looked cleaner than that. More deliberate. She needed better light and an undistracted hour before she could be certain. She put it on the list. Martha Bell arrived at the way station at midday. Martha ran the boarding house on the main road through Granite Ridge, and had been doing so for 11 years, since her husband had died of a fever and left her with a building a mortgage and a complete absence of self-pity. She was 55 years old, and spoke with the particular bluntness of someone who had stopped worrying about whether directness was ladylike sometime in her 4th decade. She brought a covered dish of cold cornbread and a look on her face that meant she had opinions. Nora told her. "I've been sitting all morning," Martha said, and set the cornbread on the table. "I came to tell you what I heard after you left. I don't need a report. You need this one." Martha pulled out the chair across the table and sat in it with the authority of a woman who had decided the chair was hers. Calvin Rourke was talking to Silas Mercer for 20 minutes on the near bank. I couldn't hear all of it, but I heard enough. He's going to ask the county board to schedule a bridge inspection, and he's going to ask Silas Mercer to conduct it. Nora looked up from her ledger. "Silas Mercer doesn't know the first thing about bridge engineering," she said. "No," Martha agreed. "But he's the most respected rancher in the basin, and Calvin Rourke knows that a man who publicly questioned your competence this morning will be seen as a neutral party." Nora set down her pen. The calculation was straightforward and ugly. Calvin had been trying to acquire the bridge crossing for over a year through increasingly formal channels. First, the petition for private management, then the proposal for county condemnation, and now apparently an inspection designed to find fault that would justify what the petitions couldn't accomplish legally. "When's the board meeting?" Nora said. 2 weeks. "That's enough time to complete the brace repair and document it properly." "The documentation isn't the problem," Martha said. "The problem is that Calvin has money and you have ledgers, and in this county, the man with the money usually gets to define what counts as evidence." "Not always," Nora said. Martha looked at her for a moment. "No," she said. "Not always. I've seen you do things people said couldn't be done before. I've been doing them since I was 12 years old." "I know that." Martha paused. "Silas Mercer doesn't." Nora picked up her pen again. "Silas Mercer's opinion of me is not a factor I have time for today." Martha didn't argue with that. She watched Nora write for a moment and then said quietly, "He did tie the rope correctly, the loaded hitch." Nora didn't look up. "I noticed." She did not see Silas Mercer for the rest of that day. She heard through the thin grapevine that connected every settlement in the basin that he had ridden into Granite Ridge proper, that he had spoken with Calvin Rourke at the freight company office, and that he had not signed anything. She did not know what that meant. It could mean he was undecided. It could mean he was negotiating better terms. It could mean he was a man who preferred to think before committing, which was either a virtue or a delay, depending on what he eventually decided. She focused on what she could control. That evening, after the last of the light had moved down off the ridge and the gorge filled with shadow, she took her father's old oil lantern to the bridge and examined the frayed cable end. She sat cross-legged on the deck and held the cable up to the light and turned it slowly. Her father had taught her everything she knew about the bridge construction. He had explained the difference between natural wear and structural failure, had shown her how the iron braids deteriorated from the outside in when exposed to weather and weight over years, had made her touch the cable at different points and learn the texture of healthy metal against the texture of stressed metal. She looked at the end of the snapped cable for a long time. Then she set it down in her lap and sat still in the lantern light with the river sound below her and the night wind beginning to move through the canyon. Several strands had been cut. Not all of them enough had broken naturally under the stress that if you weren't looking for it, you might miss the deliberate damage underneath. But she was looking for it, and she could see the clean straight edges where something sharp had gone through the iron. A cold chisel, probably. The kind any rancher or freight worker would have in a standard toolkit. Someone had weakened the cable intentionally. Not enough to make it fail immediately. Enough to ensure it would fail under load at a predictable point in the crossing, when it would be too late for anyone on the bridge to stop what was coming. Nora sat with that knowledge for several minutes. She thought about the wagon, the children, the mother with the pale set expression of someone holding herself together through pure will. She thought about Calvin Rourke, composed on the near bank, already making his speech before the last family had crossed to safety. She thought about 6 strands of cable wire with clean-cut ends and a lot of money behind whoever had given the order. Then she picked up the cable, blew out the lantern, and walked back toward the way station in the dark. She had a ride to make before morning. Eagle's Rest Ranch sat high on the mountain shoulder above the basin, and the road to it was exactly as difficult as everything Silas Mercer seemed to prefer. Steep, rocky, exposed to the night wind, lit by nothing but a thin crescent moon, and the kind of stars that only appear in high-altitude summer darkness. Nora rode it in less than an hour. She knew these mountain trails the way she knew the bridge, not from maps, but from years of moving through them in all conditions, reading the ground under her horse's feet, tracking the path by memory and instinct. The ranch house was still lit when she arrived. She did not knock politely. She dismounted, tied her horse to the post, walked to the door, and knocked the way a person knocks when they have something urgent to say, and have already decided they are going to say it. The door opened. Silas Mercer was still dressed. He had a coffee cup in one hand, and the expression of a man who had expected at this hour to be left alone with whatever he was thinking. He looked at Nora. He looked at the section of cable in her hand. He did not say anything. She walked past him into the room without being invited. She set the cable on his table. In the lamplight, the clean-cut cable ends were impossible to miss. "Your cattle need my bridge," she said. "You know that, or you wouldn't be considering Calvin Rourke's offer at all, because the only thing his toll road gives you is a 4-day detour through country that's drying out faster than this basin." Silas looked at the cable. His face did something complicated and then settled back into stillness. "Someone tried to kill 6 families to force the closure," Nora said. "Decide right now whether you came to this ridge to inspect my work or finish theirs." The lamp burned between them. He reached out and picked up the cable. He turned it slowly, the way she had turned it, and she watched him see what she had seen, the clean edges, the deliberate pattern. The fact that this was not accident or neglect, or the failure of a woman who couldn't manage what she'd inherited. This was a crime. His jaw moved. His eyes came up and met hers, and for the first time since the bridge that morning, she saw something in them that was not dismissal or calculation, or the ordinary male assumption that he already knew what he needed to know about her. "How long would it take you to be certain?" he said. "About the cut?" "I'm certain now," she said. "I've been studying cable wear for 17 years. He looked at her. She looked back at him. "All right," he said. He set the cable down between them on the table. "Tell me what you know." Silas didn't sleep that night. He sat at his table with the cable section in front of him, and his coffee going cold, and his mind doing the kind of work that has nothing to do with rest. He turned the cut ends toward the lamp again and again, not because he needed more convincing, but because he was the kind of man who required certainty before he moved, and certainty required time. And time was the one thing this situation was not going to give him in abundance. He had dealt with Calvin Rourke twice before. Small dealings, a freight rate dispute, 2 seasons back, a grazing boundary question that resolved itself before it needed lawyers. Both times Calvin had been reasonable patient and ultimately gotten what he wanted through a combination of paperwork and social pressure that was difficult to argue against because it never quite crossed into anything you could call dishonest. That was Calvin's particular skill. He operated in the territory between legal and right, and he had been doing it long enough that he'd stopped noticing the difference. Silas noticed it now. He was still sitting at the table when his foreman Pete Dawes came in at first light to report on the lower pasture. Pete was 61 years old and had been working cattle since before Silas was born, and had the particular quality of old ranch hands who have seen everything twice and stopped being surprised by most of it. He looked at Silas sitting at the table with the cold coffee and the piece of bridge cable and said nothing for a moment. Then he said that the Whitcomb bridge cable, Part of it, Silas said. Pete looked at it. Cut. Yes. Pete pulled out the chair across from him and sat down with the slow deliberateness of a man whose knees had strong opinions about mourning. Calvin Rourke, he said. It was not a question. I don't have proof of that yet. No, Pete said. But you will. He looked at the cable again. What did she say when she brought it to you? Silas told him. Pete was quiet for a moment. Then he said, She rode up here alone at night with evidence of a crime and laid it on your table. Yes. And you still think she's too hard to live with? Silas looked at him. Pete stood up and went to the stove to start the breakfast fire and said nothing else on the subject. Nora was already at the bridge by the time Silas rode down from the mountain. She had her tools laid out on the deck and her father's construction ledger open on the flat support box she used as a work table, and she was measuring the torqued brace with a careful, methodical attention that suggested she had been at it for some time. She did not look up when he arrived. I thought about it, he said. I could tell you were going to, she said, still measuring. I'll help with the repair. She looked up then. Her eyes were level and assessing, and he had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated with the same precision she applied to bridge hardware. On what terms? She said. Your terms, he said. You give the orders, I follow them. I don't speak for you at the county meeting. A pause. You don't move my tools. I won't touch your tools. And you don't treat my property as an extension of yours. Agreed. She looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded once, the way a person nods when they're filing something away for later reference, rather than expressing warmth, and went back to her measurements. He picked up a board from the supply stack without being asked and waited for her to tell him where it went. She told him. He put it there. That was how the first morning worked. By midday, they had replaced 2 of the damaged planks and begun examining the east tower brace. Nora worked with a focus that made silence feel purposeful rather than uncomfortable. She wasn't ignoring him. She was simply operating at a pace that had no room for conversation that didn't serve the task. He found himself matching it without deciding to. She handed him one end of a measuring line. He held it at the correct point without being instructed to look at the anchor ring first, because he could see where the line needed to terminate. She noticed. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. Around the second hour, his left shoulder began to tighten. He had broken it badly 6 years ago when a horse rolled on him during a cattle push in the high pass, and it had healed with a stubbornness that showed up in extremes of heat and sustained overhead work. He did not mention it. He had been not mentioning it for 6 years. Nora said without looking at him, Your left shoulder locks up when you work overhead. He stopped moving. It's fine. It isn't, and lying about it will make you less useful, which defeats the purpose of having you here. She was already moving toward the way station. Come inside when you finish that board. He finished the board. He went inside. She had a compress ready, a cloth folded over a thick paste that smelled of dried herbs he couldn't name. She held it out to him and said, Heat helps the joint capsule, 20 minutes. He looked at the compress. He looked at her. The automatic refusal was already forming. He didn't need doctoring. He didn't accept charity. The shoulder was manageable, and then he remembered Pete's voice that morning saying, What did she say when she brought it to you? And he thought about the woman who had ridden up a mountain road in the dark alone to lay evidence of a crime on a stranger's table. He took the compress. It's not charity, she said, going back to her ledger. You're repairing my roof this afternoon. Consider it a trade. He looked at the roof of the medicine room. There was a water stain along the north wall that told the story of many seasons of rain finding its way through damaged shingles. I didn't agree to that, he said. No, she said. But you will. He did. That afternoon he climbed the medicine room roof with cedar boards and iron nails from his own saddlebag, and replaced the damaged section while Nora worked below him on the bridge ledger documentation. It took him 2 hours. When he came down, she had prepared coffee and set a cup on the work table without looking up from her writing. He drank it. He looked at what she was writing. The ledger entries were detailed and dated not just the current repair, but a running record that went back through her mother's time and into her father's every replacement board and cable tension adjustment and anchor resetting, documented in a clear hand that shifted across the decades as each generation added to the previous one's record. 17 years, he said, remembering what she'd told him the night before. 19, she said. I started making entries at 12 before my father would let me do the actual work. He looked at the column of dates. 1868, 1869. Every year accounted for every major repair recorded, every measurement confirmed. It was the kind of evidence that didn't announce itself as evidence. It just sat there being true. Calvin's going to claim the bridge is financially unsustainable, he said. I know. He has a paid engineer who'll testify it's structurally compromised. I know that too. What do you have? She turned another page in the ledger without haste. 19 years of proof that he's wrong. He looked at the ledger again, then at her. She was writing with her injured hand, the wrapped linen moving across the page without apparent accommodation for the cut underneath. He had the brief, unwanted thought that most people he knew would have found a reason to rest a cut hand. He set it aside. Deputy Aaron Cole, he said. You think he'll investigate the freight shed? Nora set down her pen. He'll want to, she said. He became a deputy because he believed in something. He's just spent the last 2 years learning that believing in something costs more than they told him when they pinned the badge on. She paused. But I think if someone gives him a specific concrete reason, not a general suspicion, but actual direction, he'll follow it. The tracks near the anchor. They lead southeast. There's a freight company storage shed off the lumber road about 2 miles out. If whoever cut that cable stored the tool there afterward, there might be something left. You already looked. I found tracks. I didn't go further alone. She picked up her pen again. I wasn't going to give Calvin Rourke the opportunity to claim I was tampering with evidence. He thought about that. About the restraint it required to stop when stopping was the right thing, even when your hands wanted to keep moving. I'll go with you to talk to Aaron, he said. She looked at him. I'll talk to Aaron. You can be present. The distinction mattered to her. He nodded. They found Deputy Aaron Cole at the livery stable, where he had gone to avoid being found at the sheriff's office. He was 26 and had the look of someone who was trying very hard to appear more settled than he felt, which was the particular expression of a young official who had recently discovered that the institution he served had complicated loyalties. He looked at Nora when she walked in, then at Silas, then back at Nora with something in his expression that suggested he'd been expecting this conversation and had been hoping to postpone it. Miss Whitcomb, he said. Aaron, she said. She set the cable section on the hay bale between them. You've seen cable failure before. He looked at the cable. His face changed. That's a clean cut. Most of it. Enough of it. He reached out and picked it up, turned it the way both she and Silas had turned it, and she watched him see what she had seen. He was quiet for longer than most people would have been, which meant he was actually looking, rather than just confirming what he expected to find. Where does the freight shed track go? She said. He put the cable down. Miss Whitcomb, Calvin Rourke's company funds 30% of the county jail budget. I know. If I go looking through his storage shed and I'm wrong. You won't be wrong, she said. And you know you won't be wrong, which is why you're standing here looking at that cable instead of telling me it could have frayed naturally. A silence. Aaron looked at Silas. Silas said nothing. He had agreed to be present, not to speak for her, and he held to that. A badge that only works against poor men, Nora said quietly, is not law, it's decoration. Aaron's jaw tightened. I'm not asking you to arrest anyone today, she said. I'm asking you to look. Another long silence. The sound of horses moving in the stalls. The summer heat pressing through the stable walls. Southeast, Aaron said finally. Lumber Road. Yes. I'll go tomorrow morning, early. He looked at her. Alone. If I find something, I'll bring it to you directly. I'm not filing anything through the sheriff's office until I know what I'm dealing with. That's all I'm asking, she said. She picked up the cable and left. Silas followed. Outside in the full afternoon heat, she walked 2 steps and stopped and stood very still for a moment with her back to him. "That was well done," he said. She turned around. There was something in her face that was not quite surprise, but was close to it, the look of someone who had braced for a different response and was recalibrating. "He'll do it," she said. "I know. You knew before you walked in." "I knew he was capable of it," she said. "That's not the same as knowing he'd choose it." He thought about the difference between those two things for the rest of the afternoon. The rumor reached Nora through Martha Bell on the 3rd day of the repair work. Calvin had been talking. Specifically, Calvin had been talking at the Granite Ridge feed store, at the barbershop, at the cattle broker's office on the main road, and at least twice at the boarding house dining room, which meant he knew Martha would hear it and had calculated that it didn't matter whether she did. The story was consistent and smoothly delivered, the way only prepared stories are. Nora Whitcomb had known the East cable was failing for months. She had delayed replacing it to avoid the cost. The near disaster with the wagon families was the result of her negligence, and her dramatic repair performance was the action of a guilty woman trying to redirect attention from her own failures. "He's good at it," Martha said, sitting across from Nora at the weigh station table. "I'll give him that. He tells it calmly with a worried expression like he hates to say it." Nora was eating. She did not stop eating. "The Ellerby family has started going around," Martha said, "using the toll road instead. That adds 3 hours each way." "I know, but they're afraid." Nora set down her fork. "Who else?" "The Boone family, Elias Boone specifically." Martha paused. "Though I suspect there's more to that than Calvin's story." "Elias owes the freight company," Nora said. It was not a guess. She had seen the freight company debt notices through the same community grapevine that brought her everything else. "He's not avoiding the bridge because he's afraid. He's avoiding it because he's been told to." Martha was quiet. "People are going to stop coming," Nora said. It was a statement, not a complaint. She was mapping the consequences the way she mapped load distributions, without sentiment, with accuracy. "I'll lose the supply customers, some of the medicine payments. There'll be a period where the community pulls back. Can you sustain through that?" "I've sustained through worse," Nora said, and picked up her fork again. But that evening alone at the bridge with her ledger, she ran the numbers. The maintenance fund had a 4-month cushion. The replacement iron order from Gideon Pike would take a large portion of that. If the supply customers stopped coming through the bridge for even 6 weeks, the cushion would shrink to 2 months. And if the county board scheduled the hearing in the next few weeks, she would need to spend money on documentation that she had been counting for repair materials. She wrote the numbers in the margin of the ledger. Then she turned the page and started planning. Silas found out about the rumor from Pete, who had heard it from the cattle broker who had been one of the rooms where Calvin told his story. He rode down to the weigh station that afternoon and told Nora he intended to find Calvin and make clear that the story was false and that continuing to spread it would have consequences. Nora said no. "He cut your bridge cable," Silas said, "and now he's calling you negligent." "I know what he's doing." "Then let me—" "Let you what?" she said. "Go to Calvin Rourke and threaten him. And what does the county see when that happens? The powerful rancher defending the bridge woman. Which is exactly what Calvin wants them to see, because it confirms that I can't defend myself without you." He stopped. "A threat from you doesn't hurt Calvin," she said. "It hurts me. It makes me look like I need a protector, which gives his story a frame it doesn't have right now." She was looking at him steadily, not with anger, but with the patience of someone who had thought this through already and was waiting for him to catch up. "The only thing that defeats Calvin's version is mine, and mine has to stand on its own." He wanted to argue. The impulse was strong and immediate. Do something, apply force, make the problem stop. He recognized the impulse. He had been acting on it his entire adult life. He did not act on it. "What do you need from me?" he said. She looked at him for a moment, and he had the sensation again of being assessed. "Keep working on the bridge," she said. "Let people see you working on it. Not defending it, working on it. The difference matters." He went back to work. Chapter 4 nights into the repair, Nora woke to the sound of movement near the bridge tower. She was out of bed and at the door with her lantern before the sound repeated itself, and she stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening to the gorge wind and the river, and the particular quality of silence that is not empty but occupied. She crossed to the bridge. 3 men were there, ranch hands by their gear, not freight company workers. Someone had been careful about that, and they were positioned at intervals along the east rail, in the way that looks casual until you notice that every angle of approach is covered. She stood at the bridge entrance and said, "Whose men are you?" The nearest one touched his hat brim. "Mr. Mercer sent us, ma'am, to watch the bridge at night." She stood very still. Then she turned around and walked to Eagle's Rest. She did not take the slow route. Silas heard her coming. He was already standing in the doorway when she arrived, which meant some part of him had known this was going to happen. "Get them off my bridge," she said. "Someone already cut your cable once. Get them off, Nora." He said her name for the first time without the formal address, and it landed with more weight than he'd intended. "Someone already tried to kill people on that bridge. I'm not going to stand at Eagle's Rest knowing you're down there alone and—" "You turned my home into your outpost," she said, "without asking me, without telling me. You put armed men on my property and made a decision about my safety that you didn't think I deserved to make for myself. I was trying to keep you alive. You were trying to manage your fear by taking control of my land." Her voice was precise and not raised. That was worse somehow than if she'd shouted. "You don't protect a woman by taking command of everything she owns, Silas. You protect her by being someone she can trust to ask first." He opened his mouth. She spoke before he could. "Stand beside me. Do not stand over me." He stood there. She waited. "Get them off the property," she said again, and this time it was quieter, which was not softer. He called Pete and sent the men back to Eagle's Rest. Nora left without another word. I didn't sleep that second night either. He sat with his coffee and thought about his father. The old man had taken over every decision in the house when his mother got sick. The finances, the meals, the visitors, the medicine schedule, all of it transferred from her hands to his, under the explanation that it was easier this way, that she needed to rest, that he was doing it for her. And his mother had let it happen because she was exhausted and in pain, and because fighting the help felt ungrateful. By the time she recovered, she had stopped asking to be part of her own life. His father had never understood what he'd done. He had genuinely believed he was protecting her. He had genuinely believed protection looked like taking charge. Silas had watched his mother become quieter every year after that. More polite, less herself. And he had been 18 and then 20 and then 25. And he had not had the language to name what he was watching until he was sitting in the dark on his own ranch 30 years later, with a cut bridge cable on the table and a woman's exact words in his ears. "Stand beside me. Do not stand over me." He rode down to the way station at first light. Nora was at the bridge with her tools. He stopped a few feet away. "I confused fear with authority," he said. "I've done it before without knowing what to call it. I know what to call it now." He paused. "I'm not going to do it again." She looked at him. The gorge wind moved between them. "All right," she said. Not warm, not forgiving in the demonstrative sense. Just all right. A door opening a fraction of an inch further than it had been. He picked up the board she needed and waited for her to tell him where. Chatag. It was a quiet evening on the 6th day, the kind that arrives after a long stretch of hard work when the body finally stops expecting another emergency, that Nora sat on the bridge rail with her ledger, and Silas sat on the deck boards nearby with his back against the tower post, and neither of them found anything they urgently needed to say. After a while she said, "You asked Pete to make sure no one bothered me on the road at night." He hadn't known she knew that. "Yes. That's different," she said. "I know." A pause. The river below. The heat still present in the air even as the sun went down. "Why aren't you married?" she said. It came out as a practical question, not a personal one, which was, he was beginning to understand her way. "I decided it made a man careless," he said. "After my brother died." He told her about Daniel. The business partner. The money. The decision Daniel had made because he trusted someone he shouldn't have and didn't ask enough questions. I decided attachment was the thing that got him killed. She was quiet for a moment. Attachment didn't kill your brother, she said. A dishonest partner did. He looked at her. Blaming the bond rather than the betrayal, she said, just means you spend the rest of your life being careful about the wrong thing. He didn't answer right away. She didn't push. He sat with it for a long time, turning it over the way he had turned the cable, and he found that it was true. In the same way the cable cut was true undeniably once you were actually looking. Why haven't you married? He said. I was engaged, she said. 4 years ago. He wanted me to sell the way station and move east. You said no. I said no. She looked at the bridge rail. He told people I loved the bridge more than I could ever love a husband. Did you? She considered this with the same seriousness she brought to everything. I think what he meant was that I wouldn't become smaller to fit his idea of a wife. He called that coldness. I called it clarity about what I was willing to give up. She paused. The answer was not this. He looked at the bridge. At the repaired brace, the new planks, the cable system they had tested and logged and verified over 6 days of shared practical work. He was a fool, Silas said. She looked at him, and for one brief moment, something crossed her face that was not quite amusement, but it was related to it. Then she went back to her ledger. The injured ranch hand arrived at the gorge crossing on the 8th night. His name was Clem, 19 years old, from the Hartley operation 2 miles northeast, and his horse had thrown him on the rocky descent above the south pasture. He had ridden the rest of the way with a leg bent at a wrong angle, the kind of wrong that Nora identified immediately as a fracture when she saw him slumped in the saddle at the near bank. He needs Dr. Fielding, she said. Silas was already there. He had heard the rider from the Eagle's Rest Road and come down out of instinct. Fielding's across the gorge, Pete said from behind them. Townside. Then we cross, Nora said. Pete said, there's a closure from Calvin's men on the toll road. They're collecting an unpaid freight fee from the Hartley operation. Nobody gets through until Hartley pays. Nora looked at Pete, then at Clem, who had gone the color of old linen. We cross on my bridge, she said. At night. I know this bridge at night better than most men know it in daylight. She organized it in 4 minutes. She told Silas where to position himself to steady Clem's horse, told Pete which lamp to carry, and where told the 2 Hartley riders what pace to maintain and where not to let their horses accelerate. Then she led them across. It took 43 minutes. She counted the steps by feel, reading the bridge the way she read it in her sleep. The creak patterns, the cable tensions, the places where weight distributed unevenly and needed compensation. She talked them through every adjustment. Silas carried Clem for the last section when the horse balked at the center span, and he moved with the careful, measured weight of a man who understood that rushing was the wrong option. They came out on the town side. Clem survived. Dr. Fielding set the fracture within the hour, and the boy was pale and shaky, but alive and clear-eyed by the time morning came. 2 of the Hartley riders who had watched the entire crossing started talking on the way back. Silas heard them. Heard the way the story was already reorganizing itself in their telling the bridge, becoming something different than what Calvin's rumor had made it. He said nothing. He let them talk. Deputy Aaron Cole came to Nora 3 days later. He came quietly in the early morning without his badge visible, and he brought a freight company ledger that he set on her work table with the careful movements of someone who understood exactly how heavy what he was carrying was. I found it in the storage shed, he said, behind a tool chest. Nora opened it. Silas stood beside her, not behind, and read over her shoulder. The ledger was a payment record. Standard columns, standard formatting, the ordinary accounting of a freight company moving money around for various purposes. Most of it was unremarkable. One entry was not. Dated 3 weeks before the wagon incident. Amount in the range of $20 wages for skilled labor. Description: cable removal, Whitcomb Crossing. The name of the payee had been torn from the page. Not cut neatly torn in the particular hasty way that suggests someone realized the mistake after the fact. "The handwriting on the entry," Aaron said. "It matches entries I've seen Calvin's foreman make elsewhere." Nora looked at the entry for a long time. Then she closed the ledger. "I need this protected," she said. "I know." Aaron paused. "I'm going to copy it tonight and keep the original in a location that isn't the sheriff's office." "That's good thinking," she said. Aaron looked at her, then at Silas. There was something in his expression, not quite relief, but close to it. The look of a man who had done the harder thing and had not yet decided whether it had been worth it. "There's more," he said. "I heard something from the Hartley riders about the night crossing, about how many people that bridge has moved safely." He paused. "Opinion is shifting, slowly, but it's shifting." He left. Nora set the closed ledger on the table and did not move for a moment. Silas said, "That's your evidence." "Part of it," she said. "The name is missing." "The name will come from somewhere else." She looked at him. "It always does," he said. "Someone always talks." Before she could answer, the medicine room window shattered. Not a rock. Not wind. The particular explosive sound of glass broken by something moving fast, and the lamp on the sill went sideways, and Nora caught it by instinct before the oil could spread, and Silas was already at the door. And outside, there was darkness, and the sound of a horse moving fast away from the property, and nothing else. The ledger was gone. In the 30 seconds that the broken glass and the caught lamp and the movement at the door had occupied their attention, someone had taken it off the table. Nora stood in the middle of the room with the recovered lamp in her hand, and the glass around her feet, and the empty table in front of her. She looked at Silas. He looked at her. "Aaron made a copy," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Yes," he said. She set the lamp down. "Then we still have it." She was right. But standing in that room with the cut glass and the empty table, and the sound of a retreating horse fading into the mountain dark, right didn't feel like enough yet. It felt like a warning about what Calvin Rourke was willing to do, and how little distance remained between what he was willing to do and what he hadn't done yet. Nora did not sleep after the window broke. She swept the glass, boarded the window frame with the spare cedar planks left over from the roof repair, and sat at her work table with her ledger open in front of her. She wrote everything down: the time, the sound, the direction of the retreating horse, the fact that the ledger had been on the table and was gone when the glass stopped falling. She wrote it in the same careful hand she used for bridge measurements, because evidence is only evidence when someone has recorded it, and she had learned that lesson from her father before she was old enough to understand why it mattered. Silas stayed. He didn't ask if he could. He pulled the chair to the corner of the room where he could watch both the boarded window and the door, and he sat in it, and he did not pretend the situation was less serious than it was. Around 2 in the morning. Nora looked up from her writing and said, "You should sleep." "I'm not tired," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Neither am I." She went back to her ledger. "But I appreciate that you stayed." He didn't answer. But something in the room shifted slightly, the way a cable tension shifts when you add a counterweight on the correct side, not dramatically, but measurably. They sat together in the lamplight until morning came. Aaron Cole arrived at the way station 3 hours after sunrise, with the copied ledger entry folded inside his vest pocket, and a look on his face that said he had not slept either and was not going to mention it. He laid the copy on this table. Clean handwriting. Every column reproduced exactly, including the torn name gap and the date. "I also found something else," he said. "At the shed, behind the ledger." He set a cold chisel on the table beside the paper. "There's a particular marking on the handle. A stamp. I've seen that stamp before." Nora picked up the chisel. She turned it over. On the base of the wooden handle, burned in with a branding iron, were 2 initials and a number. "BF7, she read. "She. Boyd Ferris," Aaron said. "He's Calvin's chief foreman. The 7 is the number of the tool set he was issued when Rourke hired the freight crew last spring. I matched it to the company inventory list." The room was quiet for a moment. "That's the man who cut the cable," Silas said. "I believe so," Aaron said. But believing it and proving it in front of the county board aren't the same thing. No, Nora said. But it's a name. And a name means someone can testify, or someone can be confronted, or someone can make a mistake when they think the thing is buried. She set the chisel down. Who else knows you have this? Nobody. Keep it that way, she said. For now. Aaron nodded. He was about to leave when he stopped in the doorway and turned back. The board meeting, he said. Calvin has moved to petition for emergency condemnation, not just a standard inspection. He filed 2 days ago. The hearing is in 5 days. 5 days. Nora did not visibly react. She said, "Thank you, Aaron," in the same tone she used when she said thank you for anything practical, and Aaron left. Silas looked at her. 5 days, he said. I heard him. Nora, I'm thinking, she said. And she was. He could see it in the particular stillness she got when her mind was working fast, the way everything external went quiet, while everything internal accelerated. He had seen it on the bridge when she was calculating load distributions. He was beginning to recognize it as the thing she did instead of panicking. After a full minute, she said, "Gideon Pike. I need to talk to Gideon today." Gideon Pike's blacksmith shop sat on the edge of Granite Ridge proper, and it smelled of hot iron and old coal and the particular metallic sharpness of serious work done seriously over a long time. Gideon was 63 years old and had been shoeing horses and forging ironwork in this county since before the railway reached the territory, and he had the hands of a man who had spent 4 decades making permanent things out of raw materials. He also had a memory that was better than any written record he'd ever been given credit for. I was at his forge when Nora and Silas arrived, and he looked up with the unhurried attention of a man who takes his time assessing things before he responds to them. "Nora," he said, "heard about your window." "Word travels fast," she said. "Travels faster when people are nervous." He set down his hammer. "What do you need?" "I need you to tell me what you remember about stamping the original bridge anchors," she said. "Specifically whether you used your personal blacksmith mark and whether you dated them." Gideon looked at her. "I marked every piece of ironwork I ever made that was meant to be permanent. Your father's bridge anchors were dated and stamped in the spring of 1861. He paused. "I used my mark, the double G with the crossbar, and the year, same as I always did." "Are the stamps on the anchor plates themselves or on the bolt hardware?" "Both," he said. "Your father insisted. He said a structure should be signed the way a man signs his name to a contract because it is one." Nora was quiet for a moment. "The main east anchor," she said. "Where exactly is it set?" "Beneath the rock shelf on the east tower base," he said. "Your father and I set it 18 inches below grade and poured around it. He said he never wanted anyone to accidentally undercut it doing road work." Gideon paused. "It's never been exposed. Far as I know, it's still exactly where we put it." "Then it's still there," she said, "with your stamp and the date." "Should be." He looked at her steadily. "What are you planning?" "To dig it up before the hearing," she said. "So the board can see that this bridge predates Calvin Rourke's road claim by 26 years. Gideon was quiet for a moment. Then he picked his hammer back up and set it on the edge of the forge with the careful placement of a man putting something down so his hands would be free. "I'll come with you," he said. "I'll testify to what I made and when I made it. My mark is my word, and my word is still good in this county." "Yes," Nora said. "It is." Silas watched her shake Gideon's hand, not the way women sometimes shook hands in that county, which was to say briefly and at reduced pressure, as if the gesture needed to be apologized for, but fully the way you shake the hand of someone whose commitment you are taking seriously. Gideon shook back the same way. They began digging that afternoon. The rock shelf at the east tower base was solid, and the soil beneath the protective overhang was compacted and dry, which was difficult work, but also meant the iron beneath it had been sealed against weather for 26 years. Silas used the pickaxe. Gideon directed the excavation based on his memory of exactly where the pour had ended. Nora measured from the tower base to locate the correct position. 15 inches down, Silas's pickaxe hit metal. The sound rang up through the handle in a way that made all three of them stop and be still for a moment. They cleared the remaining soil by hand. The anchor plate was exactly as Gideon had described, solid forged iron, heavy, seated in its poured casing as firmly as the day it was set. On the upper face, clearly stamped, despite a generation of burial, were the double G mark and the numerals 1861. Gideon looked at it for a long moment. His expression was not triumphant. It was something quieter, the look of a man seeing his past work still standing after decades, confirming that the care he had taken was not wasted. "There it is," he said. Nora photographed the marking in her ledger with a written description. She had Gideon sign the entry. She had Silas witness it. Then she said, "We put it back exactly as it was. I don't want anyone claiming we disturbed evidence." Raven Rourke came to Eagle's Rest that evening. Silas heard the horse and was at the porch before the rider reached the gate. He stood with his arms at his sides and watched Calvin dismount, with the composed, unhurried movements of a man who had decided he controlled the outcome of every room he entered. "Silas," Calvin said pleasantly, "I was hoping we could speak privately." "We're speaking now," Silas said. Calvin looked at the empty porch, the absence of Nora, and appeared satisfied by it. "I want to offer you the original terms again. Free transport 5 years. Priority freight access." He paused. "And the Spring Meadow parcel, once the crossing transfers to company management." Silas said nothing. "You're in a difficult position," Calvin said. "Your lower grazing is failing. Your railway lease requires you to deliver 700 head before the end of summer. Without a reliable crossing, you're looking at the toll road route, which I think you've already calculated doesn't work for your timeline." He smiled, not unkindly. "I'm offering you a way out. You broke the bridge," Silas said. "And when it didn't fail fast enough, you sent someone to steal the evidence from Nora Whitcomb's table." Calvin's expression did not change, which was its own kind of answer. "Those are serious accusations." "They are," Silas agreed. "And I have a copy of your payment ledger and a cold chisel with Boyd Ferris's tool stamp on the handle. So does someone else in a location you haven't found yet." A silence. For the first time, Calvin's composure shifted, not dramatically, not into anything that looked like guilt or fear, but into a kind of stillness that was calculating rather than calm. He was reassessing. Silas could see it. "You'd risk Eagle's Rest," Calvin said, "for her." "I'm not risking it for her," Silas said. "I'm protecting it from you. There's a difference." Calvin stood for another moment. Then he said, "You're making a mistake." "Probably," Silas said. "I've made them before. I know what they feel like. This isn't one of them." He held the gate. "Good night, Mr. Rourke." Calvin left. Silas stood on the porch and watched him go, and felt something settle in his chest that he didn't have a clean word for. Not righteousness, not courage. Something more ordinary and more solid than either of those things, the feeling of having done the right thing at the cost it actually cost, without pretending the cost wasn't real. His railway contract was likely gone. Eagle's Rest would survive, but it would be difficult. He went inside and didn't lose sleep over it. The next morning brought the news that Elias Boone had disappeared. Martha Bell came to the way station at first light, with the information delivered in her direct, unsentimental way. Elias had not been at his ranch the previous evening. His daughters had not seen him since midday, and his horse was gone. The rumor at the boarding house was that Calvin's men had visited the Boone ranch the afternoon before and left with 2 of Elias's cattle as partial payment against his freight debt. One of the daughters had heard her father say quietly before he left that he had done a terrible thing and didn't know how to stop doing it. Nora sat with that for a moment. "He cut the cable," she said, not a question. Martha looked at her. "You knew." "I suspected. The tracks near the anchor there were 2 sets. One set from a freight company horse. One set from a quarter horse with a specific gait pattern. Elias Boone runs quarter horses." She paused. "Calvin threatened his ranch and gave him a way to pay the debt. Elias didn't know what was going to happen when the cable failed. He didn't know there would be a wagon on the bridge that soon." Martha was quiet. "He's not gone because he's protecting Calvin," Nora said. "He's gone because he's ashamed." "He was your witness," Martha said. "If he's left the county." Then I'll prove the case without him, Nora said. But her voice was tighter than usual on the last word, and Martha heard it. 2 days before the hearing, the smoke came. It started high on the mountain above the timberline where a lightning strike in the night found the dead wood that 3 months of drought had prepared for it. By mid-morning, it was visible from the gorge. Not a distant haze, but a real column. Dark and moving with the wind direction, and the wind was pointing at southeast, which meant the toll road was going to be in its path inside of 6 hours. Nora read the smoke before most people had finished looking at it. She went to the bridge and stood for exactly 3 minutes, calculating what was coming. And by the time Silas arrived beside her, she had already made the decisions she needed to make. The toll road will be impassable by mid-afternoon, she said. The fire's moving fast on the dry timber. Every ranch family north and east of the ridge is going to need to come through this gorge. Silas looked at the smoke column. The county posted a temporary closure order this morning. Calvin petitioned for it ahead of the hearing. I know. If you breach the closure order, people will die if I don't, she said. So I'm going to breach it. He looked at her. The closure order says no commercial crossing, she said. It says nothing about emergency evacuation because Calvin didn't anticipate needing it to say that, because he didn't anticipate a wildfire, because he doesn't actually understand this mountain the way I do. She looked at the smoke again. The order is bad law applied to a situation it wasn't written for. I'm going to note that in my bridge log, and then I'm going to tear down the closure notice and open the crossing. Calvin's going to use this against you at the hearing. Calvin can try, she said. I'll take my chances with a county board that has to look at the families I moved to safety versus the ones he locked behind a closure order during a wildfire. She walked to the notice posted at the bridge entrance, took it down with both hands, folded it carefully, and placed it in her ledger as an exhibit. Then she sent Silas to ride the north road and turn the ranch families toward the gorge crossing. They came in waves. The first families arrived within the hour. 2 wagons, a supply cart, 14 head of cattle, and 6 horses. Nora counted the weight of every vehicle by type and load, and arranged the crossing sequence in her head before the first wheel touched the deck planks. Families first, she said. Cattle in groups of no more than 8. Heavy freight comes last and only if the lighter loads hold the tension readings I need. She was looking at the cable system as she spoke, reading the vibration in the main line. The east anchor is solid. The west cable has 200 more pounds of tolerance than the rating I posted because I always set my public ratings conservative. We have room. A man at the front of the wagon line said, "Ma'am, who authorized?" "I did," she said. "The bridge is open. Move your family across." He moved his family across. Calvin Rourke arrived 40 minutes into the crossing. He came with 2 men from the freight company and a copy of the closure order and a face that had finally run out of composure. The fire smoke was visible from where they stood, heavy and moving, and the number of people queued at the bridge entrance was argument enough against anything he planned to say, but he said it anyway. "This crossing is under county closure," he said loudly to the crowd as much as to Nora. "Any accident that occurs during unauthorized use is Miss Whitcomb's personal liability. I am advising everyone here to return to the toll road." A woman holding a child on her hip said, "The toll road is on fire, Mr. Rourke." "It is not." "My husband's cattle are on the toll road," she said. "I can see the smoke from here." Calvin looked at the smoke. Something moved behind his eyes, the rapid recalculation of a man whose plan had encountered a reality it wasn't designed to accommodate. "The liability," he started. "Ride north and make sure people know to come this way," Nora told Silas without looking at Calvin. Silas rode north. Calvin was left standing at the entrance with his 2 freight men and his closure notice, and no audience that wasn't already moving toward the bridge. He shouted something after Silas. Silas did not turn around. The crossing took 4 hours. In the 3rd hour, the west anchor began pulling. Nora felt it before anyone saw it. The particular change in cable behavior, when an anchor point starts to lose its seating, a vibration that moved up through the hand line she kept against the main cable as a constant reference. She did not announce it to the crowd. She moved to the anchor position and crouched down and looked, and then called for Silas. He was beside her in 40 seconds. "The anchor plate is loose," she said quietly. "Someone worked at it recently. The disturbed soil is fresh." He looked. He saw it. Ferris. "Before the fire started, before anyone knew we'd need the bridge today." She looked at the anchor. Calvin had someone loosen it before the hearing. If the closure order didn't work, the anchor failure would. "Can you hold it?" "Not alone." She was already calculating. "I need you to brace from below while I reset the plate from the top. We have to do it while the crossing continues because stopping it now would cause a worse panic than the delay." He didn't argue. He didn't ask if there was another way. He looked at the descent to the anchor position and said, "Tell me what you need." She told him. They worked side by side, him holding the plate from below with both hands braced against the tower timber, her resetting the anchor fastening from above with a leverage bar and the tools she kept in the emergency box on the tower post. The vibration in the cable eased. The plate seated back into its correct position. They were climbing back to the deck when Boyd Ferris appeared. He had come up from the south bank on foot moving fast, and he was heading not for Calvin, but for the far end of the bridge where the closing families were still crossing. He had a tool bag. Nora saw the bag and understood instantly what was in it and where he was going. "Aaron," she said. Aaron Cole was already moving. He caught Ferris at the center span in front of 24 witnesses, ranchers' wives, children, and 3 men from Silas's crew who had come over on the last cattle group. He caught him by the arm and pulled the tool bag from his hand and opened it in full view of everyone on the bridge. Cold chisels. A length of new-cut cable. The same initials burned into the handles. Ferris said, "You were just arrested," Aaron said. His voice had changed. It was not the voice of the young deputy who had stood in the livery stable worrying about the county jail budget. It was something harder and more certain, the voice of someone who had chosen something and was done being uncertain about the choice. In the confusion of the arrest and the crowd pressing forward to see Calvin, Rourke tried to leave. He actually turned and walked toward his horse, calm and measured, as if he were simply concluding a business meeting that had gone longer than expected. Silas stepped in front of him. He didn't touch Calvin. He didn't threaten him. He simply stood there, all of him, the full physical fact of a mountain rancher who had moved cattle through the worst passes in western Montana and wasn't particularly impressed by a man in a clean coat. "Aaron," Silas said. Aaron looked up from Ferris. He saw Calvin. He looked at Ferris again. He made a decision. "Mr. Rourke," he said, "I need you to stay." Calvin stayed. The last families crossed as the smoke reached the near ridge. Nora counted them across. Every one. She stood at the far end and watched the crossing complete itself, with the bridge holding the cables, holding the repaired anchors, and the structure doing exactly what her father had built it to do, and exactly what she had spent 19 years ensuring it could keep doing. When the last wagon cleared the deck, she stood on the bridge alone for a moment. The gorge wind came up through the canyon and moved through the cables the way it always did, making the particular low resonance she had been hearing all her life. Not a warning sound, but a working sound. The sound of a structure under load, doing what it was designed to do. She put her hand on the main cable and held it there. Then Silas was beside her. Not speaking, not needing to. She said, "The hearing is in 2 days." "I know. Ferris will talk. He doesn't strike me as a man who takes criminal responsibility for someone else without negotiation." "No," Silas agreed. "He doesn't." She looked at the far bank where Calvin was standing between Aaron and one of Silas's riders, having a very different kind of conversation than he had anticipated when he came to the gorge that morning. "You turned down his offer," she said. "It was not a question. He told you Eagle's Rest was at risk." "Yes." She turned and looked at him directly. "He was right that it's at risk." "I know," Silas said. "You did it anyway." He met her eyes. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That was a significant thing," she said. She said it plainly without embellishment, which was, he had learned the way she said things that cost her something to say. "You saved everyone on that crossing today," he said. I was just present. You braced the anchor. You told me how. She looked at him for a long moment, with the gorge wind between them, and he saw something in her face that had not been there on the first morning. Not softness exactly, but an openness. The door that had moved a fraction on the day he apologized had moved further. He could see it. He didn't push it. She turned back to the bridge and looked at the far bank where the families were settling their cattle and checking their wagons and beginning the ordinary business of being alive and unharmed. I stood before this crowd once, Silas said quietly, and told them no man could live with you. She was still. He said, today every person on this crossing lives because you refuse to let this bridge die. He paused. I wanted to say that where you could hear it, not to make up for the first time. Nothing makes up for it. But because it's true, and you deserve to hear true things said plainly. Nora looked at the crossing, at the families, at the living evidence of what she had built and maintained and refused to surrender. She did not cry. She was not built for crying in public and had made her peace with that about herself a long time ago. But she said, thank you, and she meant it the way she meant the things that cost her something, which was completely. That evening Ferris talked. He talked to Aaron in the room behind the jail, with a careful attention to detail that suggested he had been deciding since the moment of his arrest. Exactly how much to trade for exactly what reduction in his situation. He confirmed the payment. He confirmed Calvin's order. He confirmed the date the cable was cut and the tools used and the plan to loosen the anchor before the hearing, so that even if the hearing went against Calvin, the bridge would fail shortly after. And he gave them one more thing, a contract. Folded in the inside pocket of his vest, which Aaron found when he took inventory of Ferris's belongings. A contract between the Granite Ridge Freight and Toll Company and a railway corporation out of Chicago. An exclusive agreement for all crossings and road access between the basin ranches and the railway terminal. If Calvin had succeeded, every rancher in the territory would have paid his company a toll on every animal, every supply wagon, and every medical crossing for the next 30 years. The numbers in the contract were enormous. Aaron brought the contract to Nora that night. She read it twice. Then she set it on the table beside her ledger and the copied entry and Gideon's signed witness note and the cold chisel with Ferris's stamp. She looked at everything on the table. Silas was in the corner chair. He looked at the table too. That's your case, he said. That's my case, she said. She reached out and straightened the edges of the documents so they were aligned, the precise habit of someone who needed order before rest. Get some sleep, he said. You too, she said. He didn't leave. She didn't ask him to. Outside, the fire had moved past the ridge and was burning itself out against the stone face of the far canyon wall, and the air smelled of smoke and heat, and the particular mineral sharpness of summer in the mountains after a long dry spell. The gorge was quiet. The bridge cables made their low working sound in the wind. 2 days until the hearing. Everything they had was on that table. It would have to be enough. The morning of the hearing, Nora rose before the sun. She dressed in the same way she dressed for any serious work, practically without ceremony, choosing the clothes that would hold up through a long day rather than the ones meant to impress. She put her ledger in the leather satchel her father had used for the original bridge contracts. She put the copied ledger entry inside the front cover. She put Gideon's signed witness note behind that, and the railway contract behind that, and Aaron's written report on Ferris's confession at the back, where she could reach it quickly if she needed to. Then she sat at her table and drank her coffee and did not allow herself to imagine how the day would go. Imagining outcomes was a luxury for people who had time to recover from being wrong. She did not have that time. She had the documents in the satchel and the facts she knew and the witnesses who had agreed to speak, and that was what she was going to walk into that room with, and it was going to have to be enough. Martha Bell arrived at the way station just as Nora was finishing her coffee. She came through the door without knocking, which was her way, and set a wrapped bundle on the table that turned out to be biscuits and a small jar of honey. And she looked at Nora in the particular assessing way she had that was not unkind, but missed nothing. You look ready, Martha said. I am ready, Nora said. Good. Martha sat down across from her and poured herself the last of the coffee without being invited. Calvin arrived in town last night. He has 2 lawyers from Billings. Brought them in by private stage. Nora set down her cup. 2. 2. Martha confirmed. And a man he's calling an independent engineer, though I've heard from the hotel clerk that the man has been staying in Calvin's suite and taking his meals there, which is a peculiar definition of independent. Of course he does, Nora said. She was not surprised. She filed it away. Aaron has Ferris secured, Martha said. The sheriff tried to release him on Calvin's request this morning, and Aaron told him the prisoner was material to a county hearing and couldn't be moved without the board's authorization. She paused. The sheriff was not pleased. Aaron is learning, Nora said. He's learning fast, Martha agreed. Necessity is a good teacher. She looked at the satchel. How strong is your case? Strong enough, Nora said. If the board is willing to see it. And if they're not? Nora met her eyes. Then I'll make them willing. Martha smiled the small, real smile she reserved for moments when she was genuinely pleased by something. There it is, she said. That's the woman who built this bridge. My father built the bridge, Nora said. Your father built the timber and iron, Martha said. You built the rest. The Granite Ridge Meeting Hall held approximately 80 people comfortably and was holding well over 100 when Nora arrived. She felt them before she saw most of them. The weight of that many people in a confined space. The particular combination of heat and tension and collective attention that made the air feel pressurized. She walked through the door with her satchel, and she did not look at the crowd for approval or for threat. She looked for the board table found it at the front, identified the 3 board members seated behind it, and walked toward them. Calvin was already there. He sat to the left of the speaker's position, with his 2 Billings lawyers arranged beside him like a statement of resources. His independent engineer occupied the chair beyond them. Calvin's face when he saw Nora arranged itself into an expression of polite concern, as if he were sorry she had gone to the trouble of coming. Nora sat across from him and put her satchel on the table in front of her and folded her hands on top of it. The board chairman, a man named Grover Hatch, who had been administering county business for 16 years with the methodical conscientiousness of someone who genuinely believed in process, called the room to order. It took 2 calls. The room settled. Hatch explained the purpose of the hearing: emergency condemnation petition, structural safety question, community infrastructure determination, and then gave the floor to Calvin's legal team. They were good. Nora had known they would be. The lead lawyer, a compact man with a precise voice and the manner of someone accustomed to making complexity sound simple, laid out the case in 3 clean segments. The bridge was structurally compromised, as evidenced by the near disaster. With the wagon families, Nora Whitcomb lacked the financial resources for professional maintenance, and the public interest was better served by private professional management than by individual stewardship based on sentiment and inheritance. High used the word sentiment 4 times. Each time he glanced toward the crowd as if he were inviting them to share his gentle regret about the situation. Calvin's engineer testified that the bridge showed significant wear, and that in his professional assessment, the east cable system was insufficient for sustained commercial load. Nora wrote 1 word in the margin of her ledger: Ferris. Then it was her turn. She stood. She said, "I'd like to start with the engineer's testimony." Hatch nodded. She opened her satchel. Mr. Crane's assessment of the east cable system is correct. The system did show significant compromise at the time of the wagon incident. What his testimony omits is why. She placed the copied ledger entry on the board table. This is a payment record from the Granite Ridge Freight and Toll Company, dated 3 weeks before the wagon incident. The payment is described as Cable Removal Whitcomb Crossing. The payee name was torn from the original, which Deputy Cole has in evidence. The room moved. Not loudly, a wave of compressed attention, people shifting and leaning and exchanging glances that they tried to keep quiet. Hatch looked at the document. Where is the original? The original was stolen from my property 8 days ago during a night attack in which my medicine room window was broken, Nora said. Deputy Cole has a sworn report of the incident. He also has the cold chisel used to cut the bridge cable, which bears the personal tool stamp of Boyd Ferris, chief foreman of the Granite Ridge Freight and Toll Company. She placed Aaron's written report on the table. Mr. Ferris is currently in county custody and has provided a full confession, which Deputy Cole is prepared to deliver to this board. Calvin's lead lawyer was on his feet. Board chairman, this is... Sit down, Hatch said. He was reading Aaron's report. He read it to the end. Then he set it down and looked at Calvin. Calvin's composure held, barely. The cable was not failing from neglect, Nora said. It was cut deliberately to create the appearance of neglect. The bridge my father built in 1861 has been maintained continuously and competently for 19 years. The evidence of that maintenance is in this ledger. She opened it on the table, all 19 years, the continuous column of dates and measurements and repairs and costs and solutions. Every repair documented, every river measurement recorded, every replacement part sourced and logged. She turned to the engineer. Mr. Crane, in your professional assessment, what would you expect a properly maintained suspension bridge to show at 26 years of age? The engineer opened his mouth, looked at Calvin, and then apparently decided that his professional reputation was worth more than his day's fee. Normal wear on surface planking, he said. Sound anchor hardware. Functioning cable tension. Thank you, Nora said. That is exactly what this bridge shows, which you can confirm by examining Gideon Pike's original blacksmith stamp on the anchor plate, dated 1861, intact, as Mr. Pike is prepared to testify. She placed Gideon's signed statement on the table. The room was very quiet now. Not the silence of boredom or confusion. The silence of people paying close attention, because the thing they were watching had become more interesting than they had expected. Calvin's lawyer recovered quickly. He was too experienced to be caught flat-footed for long. He called Silas Mercer. Silas stood. He moved to the front of the room with the deliberate, unhurried physicality that was simply how he moved through every situation, and he stood before the board without fidgeting. The lawyer said, "Mr. Mercer, you operate Eagle's Rest Ranch, is that correct?" "It is. You've had occasion to observe the Whitcomb Bridge and assess whether it can safely handle commercial cattle transport." "I have." "And in your assessment, can the bridge safely carry your full cattle herd?" "No," Silas said. Calvin's lawyer smiled. The room murmured. Nora did not move. "It cannot carry 700 head at once," Silas continued. "No bridge of that span should carry 700 head at once. That's not a structural failure, that's basic load management." He looked at the lawyer steadily. "Miss Whitcomb has a staged crossing plan that distributes the load in groups and achieves safe transport of the entire herd. It's more careful than anything the toll road offers, and the toll road, as this county witnessed 2 days ago, cannot handle a wildfire." The smile left the lawyer's face. Silas said, "I was offered a private agreement by Calvin Rourke. Free transport for 5 years, priority freight access, and the Spring Meadow parcel, in exchange for supporting the bridge condemnation." He paused. "I want this board to know that I considered it. Eagle's Rest is in a difficult position this season, and the offer was financially significant. I considered it for approximately 2 days." He let that sit. "Then I saw what Calvin had actually done to get to the position of making that offer," he said. "And I declined." The room erupted. Not in applause, not quite, but in the collective sound of 100 people releasing the breath they'd been holding while they waited to find out what kind of man Silas Mercer was going to be today. It was a sound that meant something even if it was too complicated to describe simply. Hatch called for order. Order returned. Silas returned to his seat. Nora looked at him. He looked at her. She gave him one small nod, and he knew exactly what it meant because by now he was beginning to know how she communicated the things that mattered. Then the door opened. Elias Boone walked in. He had his 3 daughters with him, all adults, all with the careful, composed faces of women who had agreed to something difficult and were going to see it through. Elias himself looked like a man who had made a decision that had cost him several nights of sleep and several years of pride, and was carrying both of those costs visibly. He looked at Nora first. He couldn't seem to help it. She looked back at him without expression. He walked to the front of the room and stood before the board without being called. "My name is Elias Boone," he said. "I cut the east cable on the Whitcomb Bridge." The room exploded. Hatch used his gavel 3 times before the noise subsided enough for Elias to continue. "Calvin Rourke's freight company held a debt against my ranch," Elias said. His voice was level in the way voices go level when a person has rehearsed what they're going to say and is holding tight to the rehearsed version. "He threatened to seize my property if I didn't cooperate. He told me the cable cut would force a closure notice before anyone used the bridge, that no one would be at risk." His jaw moved. "I believed him because I needed to believe him. I know that is not an excuse." Nora watched Elias the whole time he spoke. She watched the way his daughters stood behind him, not touching him, not supporting him physically, but present, which was its own kind of statement about what kind of man he was underneath the terrible thing he had done. "I didn't know the wagon families were going to be on that bridge," he said. "When I found out, I left because I couldn't look at what I'd nearly done. I took my daughters to safety because Calvin's men had threatened them." He looked at Nora directly. "I should have come forward immediately. I didn't. That's on me." He stopped talking. The room was silent. Calvin's lead lawyer stood and said, "Board Chairman, this testimony," Hatch said without looking up from the notes he was making, "is exactly the kind this board exists to hear. Sit down." The lawyer sat. Nora stood. "I want to say something about Mr. Boone," she said. Hatch nodded. "What Calvin Rourke did to the Boone family is part of the same system he used against the bridge," she said. "He controls indebted ranchers the way he tried to control the crossing by making the cost of resistance higher than the cost of compliance. Mr. Boone made a wrong decision under coercion, and this board should hold him accountable for that. But this board should also understand that the coercion was real, and that as long as one private company controls the economic survival of this many families, it will keep producing exactly this kind of moment." She reached into her satchel and placed the railway contract on the table. "This is the reason Calvin Rourke wanted my bridge," she said. "Not management efficiency, not public safety. This is a contract with the Chicago Railway Corporation, giving exclusive toll rights on every crossing and road access in this basin for 30 years. The numbers are on page 4. Hatch turned to page 4. He read the numbers. He set the contract down on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man who is controlling his reaction. "Where did you get this?" he said. "It was in Boyd Ferris's vest pocket when Deputy Cole arrested him on the bridge during the fire evacuation," Nora said, "in front of approximately 40 witnesses." The room was silent in a different way now. Not the silence of collective attention, the silence of collective understanding arriving all at once. Hatch looked at Calvin. Calvin said, "That contract is a preliminary." "It's signed," Hatch said, "by you, and dated 6 weeks ago." He looked at the board members on either side of him. Something passed between the 3 of them. Not words, but the kind of confirmation that comes from people who have worked together long enough to read each other accurately. Hatch turned back to the room. "We'll take a short recess." The recess lasted 22 minutes. Nora stood outside with her satchel and did not speak to anyone. Martha Bell stood 3 feet away and also did not speak, which was the most useful thing Martha could have done, and she knew it. Silas stood on Nora's other side. After about 10 minutes, he said quietly, "Elias Boone took a significant risk coming here today." "Yes," Nora said. "Calvin's lawyers are going to make the cable cutting the story instead of the coercion. I know. That's why I said what I said to the board before they recessed." She looked at the meeting hall door. "The board needs to understand that you can't separate what Elias did from the system that created it. If they only punish Elias, they leave the system intact. And if they understand that, then they make a ruling that actually changes something." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you trust them to understand it?" she considered. "I trust them to understand the railway contract," she said. "That's a language every county board speaks." Gideon Pike came and stood beside Silas, and the 3 of them waited in the summer heat without speaking, and the crowd around them moved and talked, and the noise of it washed over them, and none of it penetrated the particular focused quiet that had settled around the three people who had done the most work to bring this moment about. When the door opened and Hatch appeared, Nora went back inside first. Hatch read the decision standing. He had the manner of a man who had spent 16 years trying to do his job correctly and had on occasion failed at it in the ways that institutions inevitably fail, and who was today choosing to do it correctly and knew the difference. The condemnation petition was denied. The bridge was recognized as protected community infrastructure under an existing county agreement predating any of Calvin Rourke's road claims, the original copy of which had been in Nora's ledger all along, filed by her father in 1861, and copied into every subsequent county record at maintenance cost, something no one had looked up because no one had needed to look it up until now. The Granite Ridge Freight and Toll Company's operating license was suspended pending criminal investigation into the cable sabotage, the loosed anchor plate, the stolen ledger, and the coercive practices documented in Elias Boone's testimony, and the accounts of 3 other indebted ranchers who had come forward during the recess to add their names to a statement that Aaron Cole was holding. The railway contract was voided on the grounds that it had been executed in anticipation of a condemnation that had involved criminal activity, which meant the foundation of the agreement was fraudulent. Nora retained full ownership of the way station, full stewardship of the bridge, authority over all maintenance decisions, the right to keep local family crossing free, the right to charge commercial freight operators a maintenance fee set by her own assessment of the bridge's actual upkeep costs. Hatch looked up from his notes after reading the decision and said, "This board would also like to note for the record that the bridge performed safely and without incident during the fire evacuation 2 days ago, during which an estimated 67 people and 300 head of cattle were moved across a structure that this board had temporarily closed based on a petition we now understand was filed in bad faith." He looked at the room. "The closure notice is rescinded, and the record will reflect that Miss Whitcomb's decision to open the bridge during the evacuation was correct, and the board's order was not." Nora sat very still. It was the part she had not asked for and had not expected. Martha Bell made a sound beside her that was not crying technically, but was operating in the same vicinity as crying. Calvin Rourke left the room between his 2 lawyers without speaking to anyone. He did not look at Nora. He did not look at Silas. He did not look at Elias Boone, though Elias watched him leave with the expression of a man who had paid a high price and was still calculating whether it had been worth it. Aaron Cole was waiting outside. Nora watched through the meeting hall window as Aaron spoke to Calvin and the lawyers on the steps. She watched Calvin's composed face go through its last performance of the day, the measured argument, the reasonable tone, the attempt to find the angle that would change the situation. There wasn't one. Aaron had the warrant. It had been prepared that morning after Ferris's confession, held back until after the hearing, so that the board's decision would be on the record first. Aaron served it with the particular quality of someone who had decided what kind of deputy he was going to be, and was done wavering about it. Calvin was placed under arrest on the steps of the Granite Ridge Meeting Hall, in full view of approximately 60 people who had come outside to watch. He went quietly, whatever else. Calvin Rourke he was not a man who made scenes. Even this, he managed with a kind of dreadful composure, as if being arrested were simply another meeting he had not anticipated needing to attend. Nora watched until the door of the jail closed. Then she turned back to the room where the ranchers were beginning to talk to each other in the released, relieved way of people whose collective tension has broken all at once. Outside in the late afternoon heat, Silas found her near the hitching post. "You lost the railway contract," she said. It was the first thing she'd said to him alone since the decision. "I know. Eagle's Rest needs that transport arrangement." "I'll find another one," he said. "There are other buyers. Takes more time, but there's another route through the Western Trail if the summer holds." She looked at him. "I've mapped the Western Trail." He waited. "It's difficult," she said. "Narrow in 3 places, and there's a water problem in the middle section, but there are springs that most people don't know about." She paused. "I know where they are." He understood what she was offering. Not a rescue, A partnership. I'd need a guide, he said. I'm aware, she said. What do you want in return? She met his eyes. The same thing you finally learned to give me. An honest partnership. He held that. The heat pressed around them. Behind them, the meeting hall noise was beginning to spill outside as people came out in groups talking, arguing, processing. Someone called Nora's name in the crowd, and she raised a hand to acknowledge it without breaking the conversation with Silas. When do you need to move the herd? She said. 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if the lower grass holds longer than I expect. I can be ready in 2. She picked up her satchel. I'll send you the trail notes tomorrow. She started to walk toward her horse. He said, Nora. She stopped. Thank you, he said, for not letting me be on the wrong side of this. She turned around. She looked at him with the full direct attention that was her particular way of seeing people, and he stood in it without looking away. You put yourself on the right side, she said. I didn't do that for you. No, he agreed. But you made it harder to stay on the wrong one. Something moved in her expression. Brief, genuine, unguarded. In a way that he was beginning to understand was rare from her and therefore valuable. Then she turned and walked to her horse and rode toward the gorge. The cattle drive started on the 14th day after the hearing. 700 head Eagles rest crew of 12, and Nora Whitcomb, riding at the front with her trail notes in her saddlebag, and her sun hat pulled low against the summer glare. The first of Silas's cowhands to receive an order from her was a man named Dale Cook, 44 years old, 20 years with Eagles Rest, who had the particular stubbornness of experienced ranch hands who had developed strong opinions about who was qualified to give them directions. Dale looked at Nora when she told him to hold the lead cattle on the left fork, not the right, because the right trail had a soft shoulder that would cause problems with 300 pounds of animal on it. He did not move immediately. Silas said, anyone too proud to follow the best guide can walk home. Dale moved. Nora did not comment on it. She did not thank Silas for it. She simply rode forward, and the cattle followed her, and that was the matter settled. They made 10 miles the first day through the narrow upper section where the trail required exactly the precision Nora had described, and Dale Cook had nearly dismissed. The soft shoulder held for 4 horses and failed for 5, and Nora had routed the cattle around it before most of the crew understood why they were detouring. At camp that night, Dale came to Nora's fire and sat down across from it. He said, How'd you know about the shoulder? I've ridden this trail in 4 different seasons, she said. The spring runoff creates an underground water table at that section. It's load-bearing enough in fall. In summer after a drought like this one, the surface crust can hold until it can't. Dale looked at the fire. I was going to push the lead cattle through the fast way. I know, she said. That's why I told you the left fork. A pause. How many cattle would we have lost? He said. She thought about it honestly. Hard to say. Some would have made it through before the shoulder gave. Maybe half the lead group when it failed. She paused. And some of your men depending on where they were positioned. Dale was quiet for a longer time. Then he said, Ma'am. She looked at him. I'll follow your directions, he said. It was not an apology. It was a declaration which was better. Good, she said. Because tomorrow we have the water problem, and I'll need you at the front with me when I show you where the springs are. He was at the front with her the next morning. The water problem was a 2-mile section of trail that had no visible water source. Every map of the western route marked it as dry. Every rancher who had attempted the trail had either turned back at this point or had lost animals to dehydration before the next reliable source appeared 7 miles further on. Nora stopped the herd at the entrance to the dry section. Silas rode up beside her. This is where most people fail it, he said. Most people follow the surface, she said. She was looking at the rock face on the left side of the trail, reading something in it that he couldn't see. My father found the springs on this section 30 years ago when he was surveying the original bridge approach. He recorded them. She dismounted. Come here. He dismounted and followed her to the rock face. She put her hand flat against a section of rock about 8 feet off the ground. Feel the temperature difference. He put his hand beside hers. The rock was cooler by a measurable degree, not dramatically, but definitely. Underground spring, she said. Comes out at grade level about 40 feet further. It's covered by a rockfall, but the water's running beneath it. She moved along the face. There's a second one around the next formation. My father's notes say there were 3 originally, but one dried up in the drought of 71. She found the outlet at grade level exactly where she said it would be. She moved 3 rocks by hand and water ran out, thin, cold, clear mountain water that the cattle smelled before she had cleared the second stone. The herd moved toward it with the authority of 700 animals who have decided something and cannot be persuaded otherwise. And Pete said something emphatic from the rear that made several of the riders laugh, and Nora stepped back and let the cattle drink and watched Silas watch her. "Your father's notes," he said. "I've been carrying them in my saddlebag since I was 15, she said. "Along with everything else he left me." He looked at her for a moment. "That's a significant inheritance." "Yes," she said. "It is." She picked up her hat where she'd set it on the rock to work. "Come on, we've got 4 more miles before camp." The night stampede happened on the 3rd day, high on the mountain shoulder, when a lightning strike 3 miles north sent a crack of sound through the darkness that hit 700 cattle like a physical blow. They ran. Nora heard the beginning of the sound, the particular ground change that happens when that many animals shift from still to moving all at once, and she was mounted before it fully registered as a conscious thought, moving automatically, cutting to the left flank, where the lead cattle were already streaming into the dark. She did not think about being afraid. Fear was a thing that happened after the emergency, not during it. She rode the left flank hard, pushing the leaders back towards center, and heard Silas on the right flank doing the same, his voice carrying over the noise in the particular tone that cattle respond to. Not commanding, but present a sound that says something large and calm is here, and moving with you rather than against you. The stampede ran itself out in 12 minutes. Nobody was hurt. They lost 14 head in the dark, but found 11 of them within the hour when Pete took 2 riders on a sweep of the lower area. At dawn, when the full count was in, Silas looked at Nora across the settled herd. She looked back at him. There was a long silence that contained everything neither of them had said. Yet all the accumulated days of working beside each other and learning the other person's particular quality of attention, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who no longer needed to fill space with noise to prove they were comfortable. 3 cattle, he said. That's all we lost. In a midnight stampede on a mountain trail in drought conditions, she said. Yes. He said, that's remarkable. She said, we both rode well. He smiled, the real one, not the polite version, the one that was harder to produce and therefore meant more when it appeared. Yes, he said. We did. The herd reached the railway meadow on the morning of the 6th day. Silas stood at the meadow gate and watched 700 head move through it into good grass and clean water, and he was quiet for a long time, with the weight of what it meant. The ranch saved the season, made the outcome that had looked so uncertain 3 weeks ago, now standing in front of him, solid and real. Nora rode up beside him. He said without looking away from the herd, I owe you more than trail notes. You owe me a partnership, she said, which you've been paying as we went. He turned and looked at her then. The sun was behind her, and the mountain was behind that, and she was sitting straight in the saddle with the matter-of-fact expression of someone who had done exactly what she said she was going to do and was ready for what came next. I don't want you to leave, he said. It came out direct, which was the only way it could come from him when it was true. I'm not leaving, she said. I'm going back to my bridge. I know, he said. That's not what I meant. She held his gaze. The meadow noise moved around them. Cattle settling, riders calling out, Pete directing the final count in his unhurried way. All of it ordinary, all of it good. Then say what you mean, she said. He did. He said, I want to build something with you. Not a declaration wrapped in poetry. Not a speech prepared in advance and delivered at the right moment. Just those 7 words, plainly the way he said everything that was true. Nora looked at him for a long time. The meadow moved around them. 700 cattle finding their way into good grass. Pete's voice carrying from the far end of the herd, two of the younger riders laughing about something near the water. All of it ordinary. All of it the kind of life that continued whether or not two people standing beside each other decided something important. "What kind of something?" she said. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "On the trail. At night mostly when there wasn't anything else to think about." He turned his horse so he was facing her fully. "I don't want you to come to Eagle's Rest and become part of my operation. I don't want to come to the way station and become part of yours. I want something that belongs to both of us and neither of us at the same time." She said nothing. She was listening the way she listened to the bridge cables completely, without interrupting, tracking every tension point. "Whitcomb Station stays yours," he said. "The bridge deed stays in your name. The herb garden, the ledgers, the stewardship agreement with the county, all of it stays exactly as it is. Eagle's Rest stays mine. The herd, the upper pasture, the grazing leases. Separate properties, separate authorities." "And the something you want to build," she said. "A shared life between them," he said. "Not one absorbing the other. A road between two places that are both still themselves." She held his gaze for a long moment, and he waited, because he had learned by now that her silences were not hesitation. They were thinking which was more valuable. "You're proposing terms," she said. "Yes." "Instead of a romantic speech." "Yes." She looked at him with that full, direct attention that still had the capacity to make him feel accurately seen, which was an uncomfortable sensation, and also he had come to understand the most valuable one he had ever experienced. "Why?" she said. "Because love that cannot survive clear terms," he said, "is only hunger wearing a clean shirt." Something broke open in her expression, not dramatically, not with tears, or a sudden softening that erased everything she was. It was smaller than that, and therefore more real. A laugh. Brief, genuine, unguarded, the first one he had heard from her that was purely without armor. She pressed her hand against her mouth for a moment. Then she said, "That is either the most unromantic proposal in the history of Montana, or the most honest one." "I was hoping those might be the same thing," he said. She dropped her hand. She looked at him. "I don't need you, Silas," she said. "I want to be clear about that before I say anything else. I could maintain that bridge alone for another 19 years. I could run the way station alone. I have done it, and I would do it again." "I know," he said. "But I am tired," she said, and the word landed with the full weight of what it actually meant. Not weakness, not defeat, but the honest accounting of a person who had carried something heavy for a very long time and was telling the truth about the weight of it. "I am tired of every sunrise belonging only to me. Every repair. Every hard decision in the night when the river is high and the cable tension is wrong and there is nobody to think out loud with." He said nothing. He let her finish. "I don't want a man who can live with me," she said. "I want one who knows how to live beside me." She looked at him. "Those are not the same thing. Most men don't understand the difference." "I'm learning it," he said. "I'm not finished learning it." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still talking to you." A pause. The meadow. The cattle. Pete's voice more distant now, and the summer heat pressing down on everything. "On the condition," she said. "Name it. You never again send armed men to my property without asking me first." He almost smiled. "Agreed. And I retain final authority over all bridge safety decisions. Not subject to review or override. Mine." "Agreed. And if we disagree about something significant, we talk about it until we understand each other's position. Not until one of us surrenders. Until we actually understand." "That might take a long time sometimes," he said. "Yes," she said. "It might." He held out his hand. She looked at it. Then she reached out and took it. Not the way she had shaken Gideon's hand at the blacksmith shop, formal and declarative, but differently. Her fingers closed around his and he held back, and the handshake became something else, something that didn't have a precise name, but didn't need one. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. Behind them. Pete Dawes looked at Dale Cook and said nothing. Dale looked at his boots. Pete looked at the sky. Neither of them mentioned it. The ride back to Granite Ridge took 3 days. On the first night, camped beside the high mountain spring, where Nora had found the hidden water source, she sat across the fire from Silas, and they talked until the fire went low, the way two people talk when they are no longer managing what they reveal about themselves. He told her about Daniel again, more of it this time, the parts he had left out before. The specific day he had found out. The specific way grief had reorganized itself in him into a philosophy about needing no one, which had felt like wisdom for a long time and had turned out to be a costume. She told him about her mother. How her mother had known the names of every plant on the mountain and had pressed dried specimens into the back pages of her recipe ledger and written careful notes about each one in a handwriting so small it required good light to read. How Nora had kept the ledger after her mother died and kept adding to it, pressing new specimens into the pages her mother had left blank. Continuing the record, the way you continue a conversation with someone who is no longer there to speak their half of it. You've been continuing other people's work your whole life, he said. My own too, she said. It's not all inheritance. No, he agreed. Most of it is you. She looked at the fire. My father built the bridge, she said. But the bridge that exists now, the calculations, the maintenance system, the crossing protocols, the community agreements, those are mine. I built those on top of what he started. That's what you do, he said. You build on things. She looked at him across the fire. Yes, she said. I suppose I do. He met her eyes, and something moved between them that wasn't conversation and wasn't silence, but occupied the space where the two things meet, and neither of them looked away. On the second night, higher on the trail, where the temperature dropped and the stars came out with the particular density of high altitude, he moved his bedroll to the same side of the fire as hers, without asking, and she did not move hers, and that was also something decided. On the third morning, when they came down off the mountain into the basin, Granite Ridge was visible ahead of them, and the gorge was visible to the east, and the Whitcomb Bridge was a thin, dark line above the canyon, and Nora stopped her horse and looked at it for a moment. It's still there, she said. It was not relief. It was something closer to recognition. It was always going to be still there, Silas said. I know, she said, but I like seeing it. They rode down together. Tar. Martha Bell saw them coming from the boarding house window and had the coffee ready before they reached the porch. She looked at them when they came through the door, and she looked at the way they moved through the space relative to each other, and she said nothing about any of it because she had the intelligence to understand that commenting on something still forming is the best way to break it. She poured 3 cups and sat down and said, Calvin's preliminary hearing is set for September. The county prosecutor has 7 charges. That's enough, Silas said. Boyd Ferris cooperated fully, Martha said. He gave a detailed account going back 14 months. The cable cut was the 3rd attempt to damage the bridge. The first 2 were minor, a loose plank here, a damaged drainage board there meant to build a record of apparent neglect before the major sabotage. Nora set down her cup. I documented both of those repairs. I recorded them as accelerated wear and adjusted my inspection schedule accordingly. She paused. I was maintaining the bridge against damage I thought was natural. Which means your ledger shows even more attentiveness than it would otherwise, Martha said. Your lawyer is going to love that. I don't have a lawyer. You will, Martha said. The county is providing one. It was part of the board's decision. She paused. There's also a letter from the Railway Corporation. Nora looked up. They voided the Calvin contract, Martha said. But they're interested in negotiating a legitimate bridge use agreement directly with you. Standard commercial terms, subject to your maintenance fee schedule. She slid the letter across the table. They want to meet in September. Nora picked up the letter and read it. Her expression moved through several things and settled into something that was not quite satisfaction, but was in the same territory. That's significant income, Silas said. Yes, she said. It is. She set the letter down. It's also the difference between a maintenance fund that worries me and one that doesn't. She looked at Martha. What does the community cooperative want to do about the voluntary contribution structure? Meeting next week, Martha said. 12 ranching families confirmed. They want you to set the terms. Nora nodded. She was already thinking the particular focused stillness back in her face. She picked up her coffee cup and held it and thought, and Silas and Martha let her think, and nobody filled the silence with noise it didn't need. After a moment, Nora said, "The terms are simple. Local families cross free, same as always. Commercial freight pays the maintenance fee. The cooperative contributes skilled labor, not just general help for major repairs, and I provide the engineering assessment and direction." She paused. "And every person who contributes labor gets their name in the bridge ledger beside the work they did." Martha smiled. "Your father would have liked that." "It was his idea," Nora said. "I found it in his original notes. He intended to do it from the beginning, but he died before the first cooperative meeting." She said it plainly without sentiment that required managing, and Silas watched her and thought about a 12-year-old girl making ledger entries before she was allowed to do the actual work, continuing a project whose originator was gone, deciding that the project still mattered, and she was the person responsible for it. I thought he had never known anyone with that quality of commitment. He thought he was very fortunate to be sitting across a table from her. The harvest gathering happened at the end of August. The way it happened every year in Granite Ridge tables, set up on the main road, families bringing what they'd made and grown and preserved through the summer. The particular communal exhale of a hard season that had been survived. This year, it was larger than usual. The fire had not reached the settlement. The bridge was open. Calvin Rourke was in custody. The railway letter was common knowledge. Elias Boone was there with his daughters, quieter than usual, but present, doing the work of a man who has accepted that rebuilding trust is slow and has decided to begin anyway. Nora was at the bridge cooperative table with Gideon Pike when Silas came and stood beside her. He waited until she had finished her conversation with the Hartley family about their contribution schedule. He waited until she had made the notation in her ledger and closed it. He waited until she looked up and saw him there, and understood from his expression that he had something to say that was different from the ordinary things. Then he said, "I'd like to say something to the people here." She looked at him. "With your permission," he added. And he meant it not as a formality, but as the actual thing. She studied his face for a moment. "All right," she said. He turned toward the gathering. He did not climb on anything or call for formal attention. He simply raised his voice enough to carry, and the quality of his voice was such that people turned toward it naturally, the way people turn toward something that sounds serious. "Most of you heard what I said about Nora Whitcomb at the beginning of the summer," he said. The gathering went quiet, not uncomfortable, attentive. "I said no man could live with a woman who treats every breath like a battle." He paused. "I said it where she could hear me, and I said it to get a laugh. And I said it because I had just been given an order by a woman I'd never met, and I didn't like how it made me feel." No one moved. "I was wrong," he said. "Not just about what I said, about what I saw. I looked at Nora Whitcomb, and I saw a hard woman. What I should have seen was the person who built something so solid that even when someone spent 14 months trying to destroy it, it held." He looked at the gorge at the bridge visible above the canyon. "Every one of us who got across that bridge during the fire, every family, every animal, every person we got across because she refused to let it fail." He paused. "I called her unmarriageable. She was the reason we're all standing here." Martha Bell was making the sound she made when she was not crying. Gideon Pike was looking at the bridge with an expression that belonged to a man seeing something he built still standing and understanding what that meant. Silas turned back to Nora. "I'm not asking you in front of everyone because I want an audience," he said, and his voice was quieter now, meant for her, though it carried. "I'm asking you here because the last time I spoke about you in public, I said the wrong thing. I want the public record to be different." Nora stood very still. The entire gathering was still. "Nora Whitcomb," he said, "I would like to spend my life learning how to be worthy of standing beside you, if you'll have me." A silence that lasted long enough to matter. Then she said, "On the condition that you never send armed men to my bridge without asking." The laughter came from everywhere. Genuine release, the kind of laughter that happens when an entire community's tension breaks at once into something that is better than what they expected. Silas said, "Agreed. unconditionally. "And my name stays on the bridge deed," she said. "Your name stays on the bridge deed," he said. She looked at him. In front of every person in Granite Ridge, she looked at him the way she had looked at the anchor plate the night she found it, taking the full measure of something, determining whether it was sound. "Then yes," she said. Martha Bell stopped pretending she wasn't crying. They married in early September, 3 days before Calvin Rourke's preliminary hearing, and 10 days after Nora met with the Railway Corporation's representative in Granite Ridge and signed a commercial crossing agreement that would fund 4 years of bridge maintenance from a single document. She had negotiated the fee herself. The railway man had tried 3 times to reduce it. She had explained each time exactly what the bridge maintenance actually cost, and exactly what the railway's alternative was, which was a 100-mile detour that cost considerably more than her fee. By the 3rd explanation, he had stopped trying and signed. She told Silas about it that evening. He said, "How much?" she told him. He said, "That's more than I would have asked for." "That's why I did the negotiating," she said. He said yes, without any of the bruised quality a different kind of man would have attached to the agreement, and she thought that this was one of the things she had come to understand about him, that his pride was real, but it was not the kind that required her to be smaller to protect it. The wedding was at the gorge because where else would it be? Gideon Pike had repaired the bridge bell, a small iron bell that had hung on the east tower since her father's time, and had gone silent 3 years ago when the mounting bracket rusted through. He had replaced the bracket with new iron, stamped with his mark and the year, and hung the bell back where it belonged. It rang in the September wind with a clear carrying tone that reached both banks and moved across the water and up the canyon walls. Martha Bell organized the food with the decisive efficiency of a woman who had been wanting to organize something celebratory for a long time and was not going to waste the opportunity. Ranch families brought what they had. The tables were full. Nobody dressed formally because formal dress in Granite Ridge in September meant something different than it meant elsewhere, and everybody understood that. Aaron Cole was witness. He stood with the composed steadiness of a young man who had chosen on a very specific day what kind of officer he was going to be, and had been living out that choice every day since, and was still not entirely finished, being surprised by how much clearer everything had become once the choice was made. Elias Boone stood near the back with his daughters. He had completed the first month of his community labor sentence mornings on the bridge, working under Nora's direction, learning the maintenance system from the ground up. He was not forgiven in the sense of the debt being erased. He was present in the sense of continuing to pay it, which was what she had asked of him, which was what he was doing. Dale Cook was there. He stood with the other Eagles Rest riders near the near-bank railing, and when Silas passed him before the ceremony, Dale said, "You picked a good one, boss," with the particular tone of a man who has revised a significant opinion and is acknowledging it without fanfare, which was the only way Dale Cook did anything. Silas's cowhands stood beside the fire evacuation families. A rancher who had never spoken to a ranch hand socially stood beside a widow who had crossed the bridge in the dark, holding a child and a lamp. The summer had rearranged things. Communities do that when something strips them down to what matters, and they have to decide together what they're going to rebuild on. Nora kept the name Whitcomb on the bridge deed. She signed the cooperative records as Nora Whitcomb Chief Steward. She signed personal correspondence as Nora Whitcomb Mercer. Silas had never asked her to do it differently, and never would, and she had understood that about him before she said yes, which was part of why she had said yes. Calvin Rourke was convicted in November on 6 of 7 charges. His company was dissolved. The equipment was sold at public auction, and the proceeds went first to the indebted ranchers, Elias Boone among them. His freight debt cleared from funds that had come from Calvin's own operation, which was a form of justice that satisfied something in Nora that pure legal victory alone did not. He served his sentence in a facility in Billings. He did not come back to Granite Ridge. Nobody missed him, which was its own quiet verdict on a life spent accumulating power that had not made anything worth keeping. Boyd Ferris received a reduced sentence for his cooperation. He left the territory when he was released and did not return. His tool stamps stayed in Aaron Cole's evidence cabinet, labeled and dated and filed correctly, the way Aaron filed everything now. In October, the cooperative held its first formal maintenance work session on the bridge. 11 families. Gideon Pike directing the ironwork. Nora directing everything else. Silas was there with 4 of his riders, and he did what he was told without modification or addition. And at the end of the day, when the work was logged and the ledger entries were made, Nora wrote each person's name beside the specific work they had contributed. Silas Mercer. West Tower Brace Reinforcement. She handed him the ledger to look at when she was finished. He looked at his name in her handwriting in the ledger that went back to 1861, in the continuous record of everyone who had contributed to keeping this bridge standing. He looked at it for a long time. "My father's name is on page 12, she said. "The original anchor setting." He turned to page 12 and found it. Thomas Whitcomb anchor setting, April 1861, in a handwriting that was similar to Nora's, but with different habits at the corners of certain letters. Below it, in a smaller note that she must have added later, was a single line. First crossing May 2nd, 1861. 3 wagons, 11 horses, 40 head. All safe. He closed the ledger and handed it back to her. "All safe," he said. "All safe," she said. On a morning in late October, Nora walked the bridge at sunrise, the way she walked it every day, testing the cable tension, by feel, checking the plank surfaces, reading the anchor behavior, in the particular quality of resistance the structure gave back when you put your weight on it. She stopped at the center span and put both hands on the main cable. The cable was sound. The repairs from the summer were holding. The replacement anchor hardware had seated correctly, and the wet fall weather had tightened the joints in the way that good ironwork tightens, rather than loosens with moisture. The bridge was better than it had been before the sabotage, because every weakness that had been introduced had been identified and repaired with better materials and better documentation than the original failure point. That was what destruction sometimes made possible if you were willing to do the work after. She heard Silas come onto the bridge behind her. She heard the particular sound of his boots on the plank, and the way the tension in the cable changed minimally with his added weight. She knew his weight on her bridge now, the way she knew Gideon's ironwork and her father's handwriting, by feel, by accumulated familiarity, by the particular signature of presence over time. He stopped beside her. Not behind, beside. He said, "Safe." She ran her hand along the cable one more time. She felt the tension, the soundness, the particular vibration that meant everything was where it should be. "Safe enough to cross," she said. "Never safe enough to neglect." He looked at the far bank, at the trail that led up into the mountain, at the country they both knew in different ways that complemented rather than duplicated each other. "Ready," he said. She turned and looked at him, at this man who had said the wrong thing on the worst possible morning and had spent every day since then doing the harder thing imperfectly and honestly, and without pretending the difficulty away. Who had sat in a corner chair through a dangerous night because she needed someone present, not someone in charge. Who had braced an anchor in the dark while the fire came and asked afterward what she needed rather than what he'd done. Who had stood before a whole town and told the truth about his own mistake without dressing it up or making his correction the center of the story. Not a man who had been transformed into something unrecognizable. A man who had been shown what he already had the capacity to be and had chosen to keep being it. She took his hand. They crossed the bridge together side by side, the way the Whitcomb Bridge had always been designed to be crossed, with weight distributed evenly with care, with someone who understood the structure, walking beside someone who understood the land, both of them knowing that what they were standing on had been built to hold, and that holding required tending, and that tending was not a burden, but a choice made new every morning. The bell rang as they stepped off the far side. Just once. Clear and carrying the way, a bell rings when the wind is right and the iron is sound and the crossing is open. Behind them, the bridge stood. It had been standing for 26 years. It would stand for 26 more and more beyond that, because the person responsible for it understood the difference between a structure that merely holds and one that is cared for, and because she had finally found someone who understood that difference too. Not because he rescued her, because he learned what she already knew and chose to keep learning it, and asked every morning what she needed before he decided what to give. That was the whole of it. That was everything.